Welcome to Living the Reclaimed Life podcast. I'm Denisha. We're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. So grab a cup of coffee as we chat with today's guest. This month, we're talking about tension. And there are so many different ways that tension is in our lives. We have tension after trauma. We have tension between our past and our future. And we're taking a look at this. Today, we are going to look at the tension that we have in relationships, particularly post-COVID. With emerging routines and things changing in our lives, we are experiencing tension. And so today, I have invited my friend Phil Lynn to join us on the podcast. And Phil is a couples and family coach, and he has 30 years experience as a pastor. And so we are so excited to have you today, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here, Denisha.
Phil and I worked for 10 years at church together on staff as pastors. And I'm so excited that Phil has stepped into this role of being a couples and a family coach. He is really an expert in these things. So I've invited him here today to share. How do we respond to tension in relationships after COVID, Phil? Give us some advice.
Well, it's interesting coming out of COVID, our whole life, work life, the world, our home life has changed, and I think changed forever. So that alone creates tension, but it's how do you deal with tension coming out of that? During COVID, you would think that everything was beautiful, we're together all the time, and as our spouse just loves us more, but in reality, our spouse probably wants to vote us off the island.
I think we experienced that in our home too, actually. It was a little too much together time.
Yeah. So let's kind of unpack that. What are tensions and how do we deal with those tensions so they won't be tensions anymore? In reality, we can become even closer, more intimate with our spouse as we work through the tension. So the first one to talk about is how do you manage conflict?
Yes.
So when you're arguing and fighting, what do you do with that and how to manage that? John Gottman, through the Gottman Institute, is a phenomenal marriage therapist. And he's done, and some of that's with his wife, Julie, has done over 40 years of research. And what's fascinating, Denisha, he says that 68% of conflict is not solvable. It's reoccurring. 68%. And so what do you do with that? Because when we go into conflict, we think we have to solve it. What would happen if we think about how do I manage the conflict instead of trying to solve it? One way to do that is to process, okay, if I'm going to manage the conflict, what do I need to do? Really, you have three options when you're going through a conflict. You either accept it, you change it, or you leave. Like leave the conflict and just walk out of the room forever kind of thing. Not forever, but you never choose to deal with it. And so the first one is, what do I need to do to accept it? And what that means is that many times the conflict is based on our character differences, or maybe not character, but our personality. You might be an introvert. I might be an extrovert. That can create tension. When the extrovert is constantly wanting to be on the go, the introvert saying, hold off, I'll do things with you, but I need some alone time. And that can create tension. And so what we need to do with that is to accept it, but not just accept it, but come to a place of appreciating it, of saying, God, you've blessed me with an introvert, and my wife or my husband was created this way, and I'm going to appreciate that. So it's not just accepting it and then be resentful for it, but it's accepting it and moving to the next phase of appreciation and thanking God for it, which changes your mindset and moves from tension to a sense of beauty and intimacy. The next one is change it. And what we always want to do is change our partner. And if our partner was different, we wouldn't have this conflict. If they would change, I would have a perfect marriage. The reality is the only person I can change is me,
That's so good.
myself.
Boy, don't we do that? We do think, if I could change this about them, but it is, we have control over ourselves. That's so good.
So what we typically do is blame.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do in this situation is to say, what do I need to change? And so it's praying to God and allow the Holy Spirit to reveal to you, what do I need to change in this conflict, or what's causing the conflict? What do I need to be doing differently? Because the only person I can do is change. And maybe that will change your partner, your spouse in that situation.
That's good.
The other thing we need to do when there's conflict, especially the kind of conflict that might not ever change, is to look at the deeper meaning behind or underneath the conflict. It's kind of like the iceberg, where you probably only see, 5% of the iceberg, whatever it is, most of it's underneath. What is underneath? And so you have to ask the question, what is the meaning, or why is my spouse acting the way they're acting? For example, Denisha, with finances.
Yes.
A lot of couples argue over finances. You spend too much. You save too much. You don't care. You blame me for not making enough money. You never deal with the budget. You don't care about the budget. Now, all of a sudden, we're fighting over all that. Those are just the symptoms. And then they become reoccurring. Where what would be more helpful is to step back and say, what value or meaning do you give to money? One spouse might say, it brings me security. I have a high need for security, they might say, which is a God-given need. And so how do you deal with that? Now, both spouses or the other spouse has an understanding of where that their wife or husband are coming from. Now you can talk about, okay, I understand now, and I see that you have a need for security. What can we do about that? Why don't we determine how much money we need to save so that can bring you security? Then after that, because possibly I have a need for joy, and part of the meaning to me with that money is it provides me joy to do things, to have that mad money, to be able to go on those vacations. So now we have a limit on how much we need to save. Now, if we have money beyond that, I can do things with that, and that reduces that tension because I'm understanding the why behind it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think a huge value in both the conflict and then also finding those deeper meanings is communication. I know during COVID, you'd think that we've been home. My husband and I have been home a lot together, but I found that we were kind of getting agitated at things that we weren't talking about. So I hear in this is that we really do need to talk about it. We need to be able to manage the conflict and also to find those deeper meanings. Those all take conversation, don't they?
And along with that is listening, and not just listening, but listening for understanding. Because
Go dive into that one.
many times we listen, but what we're doing is thinking about my rebuttal. I become defensive. And if my wife is speaking to me, one extreme is to say, I don't even care what they're saying because I'm listening to what I'm going to say next in that fight. And so it's escalating, but I really don't understand. And what happens too, you start chasing a rabbit trail and you start arguing about something that was not even the subject of what you started with. So you're never resolving it. So listen for understanding, to walk in the shoes of your spouse, and which will, in that communication, enhance that communication.
That's so good. I think sometimes it can be hard to listen for understanding. That really takes listening at a deeper level than, like you said, processing, here's what I'm going to say next. Oh, as soon as they're done, I'm going to say this. You're really listening with a heart to connect with that person, to hear what they're saying and not just respond. That's so good.
Well, if you think about it, Denisha, how many of us were taught growing up how to listen? It can even be a skill. but it's something we can learn. One of the skill set in learning, and it might sound awkward and mechanical to start with, but what you do is you repeat back what your spouse said for understanding. Then once I repeat it back, my spouse will say, yes, you understood, or no, you did not understand. So I'm repeating back. I'm not giving commentary on what you said. Oh, I disagree with that, or here's my response. The only thing you're doing is repeating back what they said. So your spouse gets to say, yes, you understand. So each of you are at a place that you feel like you're being understood, which again changes the focus and the emotion of that conflict or the argument.
That's such a great skill to hone in on, is to repeat. I know in customer service, they taught us to listen. If someone was upset, to listen, to empathize, and to clarify. And that was where we would repeat back, listen, and then we'd say, so sorry that happened. I was in the jewelry industry, so I'm so sorry your ring came in late, or that didn't fit, what have you. And then we would repeat back. So let me understand. So I know I heard you correctly. You had this ring sized a week ago, and now it's still too big. So sorry for that. Here's what we're going to do for you. But it was that clarifying, repeating back to them what they had just said that made them feel heard also. So can we role play that?
Absolutely.
I think this is such a huge skill that we all can practice a little bit, but I think maybe hearing it helps with that. So you say something, and then I will, as the listener, as somebody who's trying to listen a little bit deeper, I'll repeat back to you.
Denisha, I feel very frustrated right now. I would love to have the house cleaned when I come home after work and I'm exhausted, and I'd like to focus on the kids. So I'm just really frustrated right now.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you're frustrated that when you come home, you want to focus on the kids and you really want the house clean. Now, I have to say, can I tell you, that's kind of hard. Because if my husband was saying that to me, I might think, well, really, what do you think I was doing all day? And I think that's such a good point. Just to say, I just repeated back to you. I didn't let the stories. I know Brene Brown talks about the stories we tell ourselves when people say things. I could be thinking, well, you're saying I'm a bad mom, or you're saying this, but you're not. You're just saying in that I'm frustrated when I come home, the house isn't clean. And instead of reading into that, what a great listening skill to just repeat that back. Because I found, even as I was saying that, I had to really think about what you said and not let my mind wander to thinking about, well, what do you think I was doing all day? I was working too. Well, I want the house to be clean. I mean, there's so many rebuttals, and that's that shame blame game, right?
Yes. And the beauty of that too, Denise, is now that you understand what I said, you're going to be able to tell me how you're feeling and thinking and wanting.
Okay.
Because you can say in that situation, I feel shamed when you said that when I come home, I'd like the house to be cleaned. And I feel very ashamed right now. See, you're able to express how you feel instead of stuffing that.
That's good.
Then I get to respond back and say, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. Now, with the story that you're telling yourself, by telling me that, I can correct that narrative. Now we're not arguing over because you feel hurt, but you never share that with me. Now we're arguing over, you think that I never do this. Well, you never do this. Mm-hmm. And we're off to the races.
It keeps the main thing the main thing.
The main thing.
That's good. That's good. So if I were to say, here's what I heard you say. I heard you were frustrated that when you come home, you want the house clean so you can spend time with the kids. Then what would be a healthy response back to a clarifying statement? After I clarify, what would you say?
I think a good framework, and again, a skill set. And sometimes we can do this and it sounds mechanical, but until we learn it, we can adapt it. Mm-hmm. But there's 3 parts to it. The first one is I feel. So we need to, at times, speak less and not more.
Okay.
So I could simply say, I feel frustrated. I feel put down. I feel. So you use feeling words. Even if you need to get a list of feeling words, we were never taught how to express feeling words.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm using I messages. I'm not saying you're a bad husband because you said this. Now I'm starting to shame back.
Right.
All you're doing is saying, I feel, and then what the feeling is. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is express what I want.
Mm.
I feel, I want. What do you want in that situation? Many times we're afraid to say what we want, or we're so used to hiding behind that we never share what we want. I feel, I want, and then the next one is, will you help me? I feel shamed. I want appreciation when you come home from work, not complaining about what I haven't done. Can you help me with that?
That's a great model. I feel, I want, will you help me?
Now I get to choose, I can do that or I can't do that. Now I'm arguing in quotes over what the real issue is. And then I'm able to say, yes, I can do that, but I need 5 minutes before I engage with you. Now we're negotiating what we can do with your needs and your wants and what my needs and wants are.
That's good. Those are good boundaries. And if you expect that from one another, that communication, those are great boundaries just to set up. I need 5 minutes to kind of process, or let's talk about this in an hour, or something like that.
Yes.
That's great.
Absolutely. The other thing in managing conflict is that you ask the question, what does the relationship need? It's almost like the relationship is a third entity. So I come into the conflict asking the question, especially when I'm negotiating the differences and solutions. What do you need, Denisha? What do I need? What does the relationship need? Especially if we're managing the conflict and there's no solution to it. So if there's no solution to it, what does the relationship need so that we can have a strong relationship? It's a great way to visualize it, that the relationship is an actual person, like there's 3 people in the room.
I think that's really good. Yeah, good advice.
Then the next thing that we can do when there's tension is the difference between connecting behaviors and disconnecting behaviors.
Speak to that for sure.
So when I feel tension and I have a choice now, and sometimes we don't think we have a choice, and so we feel disempowered, which creates anger. So what we always need to tell ourselves is that I always have a choice. Always have a choice. And how do you decide what the choice is? What am I going to do and what am I going to say? There's 3 questions to ask yourself. The first question is, will it help the relationship or hurt the relationship? Really easy, help or hurt. So I'm going to evaluate that not after I say what I want to say. No,
it's not helpful if you do it after.
Not
did
after.
Did that hurt or help this relationship?
Yeah, it's like, honey, did that hurt you? No, too late.
Too late. Can't take those words back.
That's right. The second one is what I'm going to say and what I'm going to do is going to help pull us together, or is it going to push us apart? If you're a parent, that's a great question to ask in your parenting.
Yes.
Through discipline, and coming out of COVID, during COVID, I like to call it pandemic parenting.
Yes, that's exactly.
How do you parent during the pandemic? That's a really powerful question in what you're doing to help your kids become what God wants them to become. Am I hurting this relationship or am I pulling it together? Or one of our goals for parenting is to be lifelong friends. And so that begins when they're young. You don't work on the relationship when they're adults. That's the fruit of what you've done the first 18 years. Is it hurting the relationship or is it pulling us together or hurting the relationship and pushing us apart?
I love that. And it causes us to pick we talk about picking our battles as parents. And we're not going to pick every single battle we see. Sometimes socks just need to be left on the floor, but a character issue needs to be addressed. I think our words can either push away, we can address the same situation, but our words can push them away or pull them closer, that connection piece. I know we talked about that I think it was probably pre-COVID, about either saying things that are going to foster connection or saying things that are going to push apart. And we've tried really hard to do that with our kids. I mean, there's moments that I'm like, yep, that one pulled apart. That was not something that was a connection piece. So yeah, I think that is very wise to what we do can either pull us together and connect or push us apart, and choosing those words and those ways to address things as parents.
Absolutely. The third question, and I think we do this even unknowingly, subconsciously, is asking the question, am I trying to get my spouse to do something that they don't want to do, but I want them to do it?
That's a normal day, though, Phil. That's a normal day. I don't even understand. My mind just went, I have no idea. How do you do that? I mean, yes, I want him to take out the trash or go run errands or what have you. And maybe he doesn't want to. See, unpack this one.
Okay. These are called destructive behaviors or disconnecting behaviors. So let me give you some examples and see if this pulls on any illustrations from your home life. How's that?
All right. I'm scared. I'm a little scared. Let's do this.
So the first one is complaining. If I can complain enough that you're not taking out the trash because you're lazy. Now, I'm not just complaining about what's going on in the world. I'm actually complaining about who you are and that you're not, or we use the word always. Mm-hmm. When we use the word always or the word never, we start saying that means there's something wrong with you, and it's your character, you're lazy. We start using that, which we think that's going to compel them to get off the couch because I called them lazy and take out the trash.
Oh, no.
See, what happens when I start complaining, it pushes them away. Mm-hmm. But we think that it's pulling us together, or at least it's getting them to do something that I want them to do and they don't want to do. So let's say he does take out the trash after you've complained for 30 minutes. Did that help the relationship or hurt the relationship?
I'm going to go with hurt the relationship.
Yeah. The other one is blaming, which I think has to do with shaming. Shaming is a very powerful motivator. That is very true with our kids as well. If I choose to shame you, to move you to do something that you don't want to do, that gets at identity issues. It gets at who they are, how they feel about themselves. Mm-hmm. Same thing with blaming. If I don't take responsibility for any part in what's not being done, that means I'm blaming you. And again, it works. That's why we do it, but it's pushing each other apart. Mm-hmm. Complaining, blaming, or shaming. The other one is, and it's a favorite for some people, is to nag. And I
never nag. You can ask James. I never nag.
Never nag.
Never. Just kidding. I totally nag.
What's fascinating is there's this mindset. If I tell my spouse over and over and over, maybe they'll do it. Or if I tell my kids, going in that direction, if I tell them to clean their room 5 times, maybe they'll do it on the 6th time. But if you think about it, if I do the action that you want me to do that I don't want to do because you keep nagging me, does that endear favorable thoughts and emotions towards you?
No, I'm going to become resentful, right?
That's right. They heard you the first time.
Really? I'm not so sure about that all the time. No, that's true.
And the cousin or sister, whatever word, to that is guilty. If I can guilt you enough, I guess you don't love me enough to take out the trash. Ooh. Or whatever that issue is. then again, okay, I'll do it, but it's not helping. So what do you do in those situations when you want to get someone to do something that they don't want to do, that you want them to do?
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is if it's an issue that you have, whoever has the issue, it's their problem to solve. If the trash, and I know this is a simple example, if the trash isn't being taken out on a consistent basis like you want it done, then maybe it's okay for you to take out the trash because it's not a problem for your spouse.
That's very freeing to hear you say that. It puts me, like you said earlier, I'm only in control of me. So if that's something that's bothering me, I can act upon that and change that without nagging or harping on my spouse.
Yes, that is a huge principle in this. The only person I can control is me. Now, if it's something bigger, you can go back to communicating. I feel insignificant when you don't do this. Here's what I want. So I'm expressing what I want instead of nagging.
Mm.
Will you help me with it? If they say no, they can't. If the toilet is leaking consistently and you're always having to clean up, or if there's something wrong with the sink and you keep telling your spouse, will you call the plumber? Yeah, I'll do it. And they never do it. Then you either fix it yourself or you sit down and say, here's what I need. Here's how I feel, that type thing.
That's good. That goes back to I feel, I want, will you help me?
Yes, exactly.
That's good.
The other one that we can do is punish.
Mm.
And we do that with our kids and with our spouse. Basically, punishing is withholding what the other person needs or wants. And by doing that, that is forcing the other person to act in the way that you want to act. So again, what you're doing is controlling them, but you're pushing them away.
And that's not healthy. I mean, I know in women that I talk to, some of the things that has come up is that women withhold sex from their husbands as a way to control a situation. And I've heard it starts out as a joke sometimes. Oh, well, if you don't do this, but then it becomes the reality in their relationship, which isn't pushing them towards connection either.
It pushes them towards resentment.
Mm-hmm.
When you're withholding something that they need or want. And men typically withhold time.
Mm. And that's something we need as women. We need that time and affection.
Yes, very much so. So it becomes a tit for tat. If you do this, I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a recipe for closeness and caring.
Do you think we can find ourselves in those situations without even realizing it? Maybe we didn't make a conscious decision to withhold something we know that our partner needs or wants, but we end up finding ourselves in a pattern where that's happening. And is that something that we can do without even realizing it?
Absolutely. One of the ways to change is the first step is awareness. And so for us to even just sit down and think and process, am I doing any of these disconnecting behaviors?
Mm.
Because if I don't know that I'm nagging, I'm not going to change it.
That's true.
If I don't know that I'm complaining all the time, I'm not going to change it. And even here's the hard one, is to sit down with our spouse and ask them the sense of vulnerability. Am I doing anything that's hurting our relationship or pushing us apart?
Mm.
And if you have created that safe environment, meaning I'm not going to be defensive back to you, I'm not going to, again, do the destructive behaviors of shaming you and blaming you. If your spouse feels safe in that, they're going to be able to express that. And could you imagine what would happen in your relationship if you start becoming aware of it? Then start small. This could be overwhelming. And like you said, especially if you grew up this way, if you had a parent who always blamed and guilted you and nagged, you're naturally going to do that. So what you can do is say, I'm going to start small. What is one behavior I'm going to do differently tomorrow? and maybe write it on a piece of paper and put it up on your bathroom mirror. It will be amazing if you start small to see where you're at in a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now.
When you talked about that safe place of, if you have that open relationship, that vulnerability to be able to sit down and have kind of a heart to heart in that, would it be the same if you haven't established that, but you're hearing this and thinking, well, I wish I could go to my husband or my wife with a conversation like that? How would you set the stage for that? It's Thursday and Friday night, we have some extra time. How could I set the stage to create that space if that's not something that we've practiced in our home?
Great question. I think a couple of principles there. It goes back to the only person I can change is me. We can go into it with the expectation that my spouse is going to act and react a certain way. And I need to go into it with the expectation of, here's what I want. Here's what I'm going to do, regardless of how my spouse reacts. So I'm going to go into it and say, honey, we have some time on Friday night. Can we have some couples time? I would like to share some things that I think will strengthen our relationship. So you give a sense of what the discussion is, not, hey, we need to talk on Friday night. You know, the narrative.
I love what you said, some things to strengthen our relationship. Because that makes me want to engage. That makes me look forward to Friday night. I'm so guilty of, hey, can we talk this weekend? And my husband's like, oh no, oop, oop, alert.
Yeah,
Something's
alert.
wrong. I love that. Can we talk about and strengthen our relationship?
Then you go into it and you don't start with being critical and blaming. Because you're doing this, it goes back to, here's what I've been doing, honey, that I think has been hurting our relationship. And maybe it's starting with confession. And I see that it's been hurtful. Will you forgive me? So again, you're taking responsibility for your actions and what you've been doing. Then here's the hard one, Denisha, so you're confessing the ones that you've thought of. Now it's going to be a place of vulnerability. And I'm going to ask you, how have I hurt you? Are there any other areas that I've done? So see, everything I've done is based on what? My actions, what I've said. I'm not being critical and blaming my spouse. Now, they might have done plenty of things. But what you're doing, if this has never happened before, you're setting the example, you're setting the pace, and you're making the change. What happens in a family relationship or a couple's relationship, it's like a system. I can make changes, which will make changes in the relationship. So there's great power in that. Don't lose hope that you can't make changes. If you're the one listening to this and you're the one who will make the changes, it will impact the relationship.
That reminds me of when I've gone to different conferences and learned certain skill sets. And then I've come home, been like, honey, I can fix everything. I have these new skills. Or I went to a Dave Ramsey conference and now I'm going to, change all of our finances. And my husband sort of looks at me like, oh, I come in and I steamroll. And it took years of me doing that before he finally told me, when you come home from conferences, I'm not super excited. And I thought, ouch. But that was so good for me to hear that, okay, I've got these new things I want to try out on our family and see how they work. But I love going back to what you said about we're only responsible for what we do. So if we change and stand back and watch, that ripple effect in how our kids begin to engage with us, how our husbands or wives begin to engage with us, will ultimately change.
Yes, absolutely.
That's really good. So if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you are talking about my life right now. At home, there is tension. There is tension from being boxed together during COVID. We're trying to figure out how to come out of that. And there's been some tension in my family relationships. What would you say to someone listening?
I would say, and I really mean this, there's hope. Don't lose hope. Embrace, grab hold of it, and pray that the Holy Spirit, in this a way that I don't understand how he does it, but say, God, I need hope. And that, I think God will infuse hope and peace within you. So the thing that I want to say is there's hope. There's hope in the changes that you can make. There's hope in what God is doing in your life. And there's hope for your family.
Yes, definitely. And God is in that tension.
Yes.
One of the things I love about your coaching business, the Trias Group, is that you work with couples for their particular challenges and tensions that they have in their family relationships. And you work one-on-one, giving them that type of wisdom. And I know you've been a huge blessing in our lives as we've kind of pulled you into stuff during COVID. How could we find you?
Thank you, Denisha. The best way to find me is to go to my website. On the website, you can connect with me and I'll respond back to you. The website is thetriasgroup.com. Trias is spelled Trias, thetriasgroup.com. And we will connect there. That first session is a complimentary session where we're going to get to know each other. So if you're thinking, I've never had a coach before, I've never gone through counseling before, this is a beautiful way to discover who I am. I'll discover your story and what are your goals, what brought you to coaching, and what direction to go.
And I know once people meet you, you have such a way of just making people feel comfortable. And so that's exciting. And Phil also coaches internationally. You can coach over Zoom anywhere in the world, which is so amazing. So thank you so much, Phil, for dropping wisdom today and helping us connect with those around us in our families and in our marriages. We appreciate you.
Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Thanks for listening. I pray you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of our growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is a huge help in helping us reach more people to live the reclaimed life. Thank you so much for listening.